Hello, I'm Rebecca Weber. You're listening to AMAC's podcast, Better for America. With us today is Michael Seiffert, the founder, CEO, and president of Public Square. And I am thrilled to have him join me today. Michael, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Michael, to begin, tell us about Public Square. What made you form it and how it works for those listeners who may not be familiar?
Well, for years now, going on even a decade, multiple corporate entities in the United States have turned against the values that tens of millions of Americans still hold dear. We've actually witnessed this for decades, but it's been especially elevated in recent years, most notably with Bud Light, for example, who used to be a classic American brand. And then, unfortunately, they began to take a turn with their values, and they began to call their old brand and their old customers outdated and too fratty and too conservative. And so they embraced a progressive social campaign that ended up leading to the demise of their brand, a 26% drop in sales, for example. We saw the same thing with Target. Target came out this past summer and for a Pride Month collection decided to lecture the United States populace on issues about gender and sexuality. And many consumers said, we're not a fan of that. We just want to buy clothes and not be lectured about gender. And so in turn, Target had their first quarterly earnings miss in 6 years and had their stock downgraded twice. We have witnessed over the recent years, corporate entity after corporate entity come out looking like a progressive political organization. And in turn, consumers say loud and clear, we are not a fan of that. But before Public Square, you only really had one option, which was you boycott. And we figured that's effective. And we certainly support people's right to boycott. But what if they could actually take the next step and shop with businesses that they know were actually different? They love the country, the Constitution, basic truths. What if they could actually support businesses that support family values? And in turn, they wouldn't just have to boycott, but they could actually move their money, their purchasing power somewhere else. So I had this idea in January of 2021 for a marketplace that would be full of businesses that love the country, the Constitution, and the values that document protects. And in turn, that way consumers could shift power structures of society back toward we the people through the power of their wallet. They would not just have to vote every 2 or 4 years, but instead could vote every single day with their wallets and create a new society as a part of that. So at publicsq.com, or you can look up Public Square on the App Store or Google Play, you can find the nation's largest marketplace of values-aligned businesses and consumers the country's ever seen. We have well over 1.6 million consumer members on the platform, over 75,000 small businesses on the platform that have all agreed with the Values Pledge. And in turn, whether you're looking for toilet paper or a new pair of pants or a bike, gosh, you can find pretty much everything you're looking for on the Public Square platform that'll help you know that you're not funding your opposition as you exercise your consumer rights. And it's been amazing to witness how this has grown. We launched 15 months ago nationwide, and we are just getting started.
Wow, this is really fabulous. Obviously, Americans are craving this kind of access, working with businesses, buying from businesses that support their great values. Is there a membership fee associated with joining?
There's not. It's actually free to join for both the business and the consumer. We make money, monetize the platform in a few different ways. We sell digital advertising, and thankfully we don't have to sell consumer data in order to do that. We sell subscription advertising to our businesses. We also have revenue share agreements with many businesses to share in a portion of the transactions that we broker on the platform. We've also started our own businesses, for example, where we see a hole in the market that does not currently have a values-aligned competitor within it. We actually can go and create the business that serves our consumer base and sell it back into our marketplace. So for example, 3 months ago, we launched a diaper company. We launched a company called EveryLife. You can find it at everylife.com. It is the nation's only affirmatively pro-life, pro-family diaper company because unfortunately, every single one of the major diaper brands in the United States today is vocally or financially pro-abortion. Many of our consumers, in fact, I would go to say over 99% of them are very pro-life, pro-family. They do not want to support a diaper brand that stands for the demise of the family unit. And therefore, when we can present to them a really high quality product that actually celebrates the miracle of every innocent life, it's a powerful solution to a need that they've expressed. We get to do that with multiple products in this parallel patriotic economy. So it's free to join for both business and consumer. We have other ways that we monetize the platform so that we can continue to grow as an entity and build new features. And it's a very, very exciting business endeavor.
The issue of life is so important to our membership, Michael, and you are yourself a very proud Christian. You are versed also in very a lot of societal issues. The world has watched these recent attacks in Israel, and there is so much to unpack there. But in the wake of Hamas's brutal assault on Israel, you recently tweeted about Black Lives Matter and their blatant support of terrorism, and connected that with America's largest corporations donating thousands of dollars to Black Lives Matter causes. It seems, Michael, that the enemy of freedom has certainly expanded here in America. What should all Americans understand as it relates to those corporations who support groups like Black Lives Matter?
I think it's important for consumers to recognize that what you spend your money on is what you're empowering. So if you spend money on Uggs, Amazon, Gatorade, Microsoft, Warner Records, Intel, Xbox, Nabisco, Lululemon, Airbnb, the list goes on, all of these corporate entities have one thing in common. They have virtue signaled to you while financially supporting, to the tune of millions of dollars in many cases, BLM, an organization that is Marxist in its roots and actually stands for the destruction of our society, and this week has truly revealed its cards and its true colors. BLM Indianapolis, BLM Chicago, BLM in Los Angeles all came out in support of the Palestinian attacks. In fact, BLM Chicago, which is sort of a BLM adjacent group in Chicago, tweeted a picture of a paraglider entering Israel to murder 1,600 people, tweeted a picture of that caricature in support of Palestinians and Hamas's assault on the Israeli people. This is a massive, sobering wake-up call, I hope, for every American consumer to connect the dots here and recognize that when I spend my money on a corporate entity that funnels millions of dollars to BLM, the money I'm spending is thus in turn supporting an organization that is very proudly behind terrorism. You pair this with the fact that many of these companies also support very open border policies, and all of a sudden you realize you have a very bleak and troubling environment on our hands. There are terrorist attacks taking place against one of the United States' greatest allies in the Middle East. Those terrorist attacks are being conducted by military-age males that are coordinated with Hamas. Many military-age males are coming across our border to the tunes of tens of thousands every single day, unchecked and unverified. And we as a company are exposed. So not only are we funding these companies in their support of progressive policies, we're actually funding open border policies. We're funding the demise of the United States. We're funding the demise of our safety here domestically. We're funding the demise of our allied relationships overseas, all with the purchase of consumer products. And so our encouragement to folks is to recognize that your wallet is a weapon. And you can use it for good or you can use it for evil. And our encouragement to people is, hey, let's recognize the power in those dollars and shift them to companies that would never donate to a Marxist, terrorist-aligned organization like BLM.
Yeah. And this country is very much divided. Before this happened last week, and it is heartbreaking. I see more and more today, neighbor against neighbor. The information, I think there's an information war that we're living in because a lot of people, they're not getting to the right information, certainly. But my concern here is that, is America prepared? What could happen next? Now, you have said that the U.S. is in no way prepared for a potential world war. Why do you feel this is the case, Mike?
Well, there's a few reasons for this. Number one, our military has been completely assaulted by woke policies over the course of the last few years. If you look at the COVID season especially, the forced vaccination of our special operators weeded out some of our best fighters. In the military, you have a real sense of fighting for what's right. You have a sense of righteousness and a desire to stand up against corrupt forces. Well, what happens when our government becomes the corrupt force? You're going to have a lot of really fantastic military operators that say, hey, it's in my DNA to stand for truth. And what you are doing is speaking lies. I unsubscribe. And so when you weed out our best of the best, what are you left with? You're left with a lot of compliant folks that will take whatever the establishment gives them. And that's in no way, shape, or form a robust military fighting force. Obviously, we honor the men and women in uniform, but what's happened over the past few years with the go along to get along types is that we've seen the military lose sight of what's important. Our military is in no way, shape, or form in fighting stance. Woke policies, funding transgender surgeries with taxpayer dollars through the military. I mean, it's become all too much. Focusing more on diversity and equity and inclusion than on getting ready to fight a world war against a military adversary like China, who teaches their young people martial arts and defensive training starting at age 8 as a part of government-funded programs. The writing's on the wall. And so if we can't figure out our own country's domestic issues before worrying about the world's, we're going to find ourselves in a tricky situation, unprepared and on our heels when the world comes knocking. The last thing I'll mention on this, there's actually a good analogy that I like to use often. If you've ever been on an airplane and the pilot gives the opening briefing or the flight attendant, you'll note that they always say the same line about the air masks. So if the cabin loses air pressure, the masks will drop from the ceiling. And what are you instructed to do? You're instructed to put on your own mask before you put on your neighbor's. Even if you're with your child, you're supposed to put your own mask first, then your neighbor's. Why? Because if you can't put on your own mask, you lose oxygen and you do no good to not only yourself, but also to your neighbor. The United States is in that situation currently. The reason we're not ready for a war is because of the issues I've described. So what's the solution? Well, let's put on our own air mask first. Let's focus on rebuilding our military with strength, not DEI and ESG. Let's focus on becoming a fighting force ready for our adversaries. And then we can begin to worry about the issues of the world and whether or not we should intervene.
Yeah, really well put. You mentioned it, DEI, critical race theory, all of this woke ideology that's being shoved down people's throats. It seems that so many politicians that are in support of those policies are really out of touch with the majority of Americans. There's so many examples of this. I mean, recently, take Mitch McConnell. He cited funding Ukraine as the top priority for the GOP, while many in Congress described the speakership situation as chaos. But in reality, the people I talk to, most Americans, particularly Republicans, they're not in favor of endless aid to Ukraine. And many see the speakership change not as chaos, but as democracy in action. What are your thoughts on, our out-of-touch representation in Washington?
Well, I was actually talking this morning to a Catholic friend of mine who's a well-known influencer in the Catholic space. And we were talking about how this lack of representation from the governing authorities is not just present in government, it's also present in corporate America. It's present in the Catholic Church. Many Catholics that are more traditional in their values, that hold to the classic tenets of the faith, are very dissatisfied with the current Pope. We see this over and over again, where an institution full of individuals is so out of touch with the representatives that are supposed to represent the issues of their constituents. And government is certainly a prime example of this, but it is a cultural thing happening at the moment. There's a zeitgeist taking place where we no longer feel like the CEOs of the company represent the employees. We don't feel like the companies themselves represent the consumers. We don't feel like the governing authorities represent the constituents. And that has really disastrous consequences, because when you lose trust and faith in all of your institutions, who are we supposed to rely on when the arrows start flying? I think that Washington, D.C. Has a bad track record of closing their ears to the American population while pursuing their own interests, or they follow the money. They seek the profit centers rather than the interests of the American people, which is why, by the way, we as a company are so passionate about shifting the profit centers. Because if we, the people, can profit again, hopefully then the CEOs and the business leaders and the government authorities will focus on the issues of we, the people. Mitch McConnell, the Republican establishment, believing that Ukraine funding is the number one priority while millions of Americans are struggling day to day. They feel unsafe. They feel like their savings are not protected. They feel like their savings are actually dwindling in order to support the interests of other countries over our own. Eventually, there's an expiration date on this type of behavior, and I just don't know where that is. And so our encouragement to Americans is to continue making your voices heard. If you feel like there's somebody that's not representing your issues, primary them. And the last thing I'll say on this issue is that, I think it's important for conservatives to at least have a level of hope when we look at things like the speakership debacle. I actually prefer that regardless of how you feel on the issue of whether or not McCarthy should or should not have been the speaker, I at least prefer a party that is willing to disagree with one another. If you look at the left, they're all uniformists. All they do is conform. They walk as a unit, even though they have a lot of varying factions within the Democratic base. they're never able to speak out. The Republicans are very different. You showcased what can happen when 8 people say, hey, we're done. We're not with the program. And you have real tension. And I actually think that that's pretty beautiful. I think it's well past time that people feel free to speak what they actually think about the issues at play, because in turn, they're able to represent their constituents and their interests. So it's an interesting time in the United States, but it is more than just politics. It truly is cultural.
They're not just out of touch with what people want, but they forget that they work for us. For example, Nancy Pelosi, she said and other members of government that she and other members of government have the same rights as every other American regarding trading on the stock market. Now, you easily refuted this and suggested a blackout period that would be very easy for Congress to institute to prevent members of Congress from gaming the system. And then, Michael, today we see Senator Menendez. He's accused of being an unregistered agent of Egypt's government, all while he held this very powerful role in U.S. foreign policy. So how do we ensure that our members of Congress don't put their own personal ambitions above the duty to serve, as you say, we the people?
I think, number one, it's electing different leaders. I think that, again, regardless of how you feel on Matt Gaetz specifically, Matt has been one of the strongest advocates against Congress members trading. I think that that's an admirable cause. Excuse me. I also think that if any politician is standing against that, if they want the ability to continue trading stocks, you start to have to question their intentions. So I think number one is it's getting really informed. It's getting very informed about what these politicians are actually doing. Number two, it's electing different politicians if they have showcased a track record of operating against the interests of the American people. And third, I think it also comes down to confronting the lobbyists. Our political environment is so riddled with monetary corruption because many of these politicians will prioritize the interests of lobbyists over their own constituents. We have to call that out. We've actually got to go after the lobbying firms themselves. When you have a company like Nike, for example, that'll preach to you all day long about their virtue, but then they'll lobby Congress to continue turning a blind eye to slave labor being utilized in China to manufacture their shoes. It's like, that is just such a corrupt enterprise that the American people need to call out more frequently. So I think that Menendez is a good example of a much deeper rooted issue here. Everybody's bought and paid for, at least the majority of folks are, and it's up to the American people to really hold these people accountable. We also have to pay a lot more attention to the midterms. I think that's the last note, is that we care a lot about politics during the presidential election, but a lot of this corruption is seated not at the presidency, but in Congress. A lot of this corruption is seated even at the local level in some of how these state legislatures operate. And so I think it's a matter of getting more day-to-day involved as well, not just paying attention every 4 years. If we're ignorant the other 3 years, Congress is going to be able to keep doing what they're doing and not feel any pressure to change.
Yeah. And I mentioned that we're in an informational war, but also a spiritual war right now. Our government has been weaponized against private enterprise, but shockingly, those who are weaponizing power, Hillary Clinton, for example, refer to conservatives as fascists. I mean, just recently, she openly suggested that Trump supporters are in a cult and need to be deprogrammed. I mean, I don't think that that's just harmless rhetoric. I think that we've seen this ideology have major influences on our society. Tell us how Public Square is fighting to combat, this extreme agenda that's plaguing America.
Well, I think you just nailed it, actually. Most Americans hear rhetoric like what you just described that was espoused by Hillary, and they're immediately appalled. I think Public Square has an opportunity to turn that appalled response into proactive action. We have the opportunity to be, as Hillary Clinton calls us, the deplorables, a powerful economic engine. If you look at even Trump voters from 2020 and you begin to economically categorize that block, you're looking at $7 trillion in GDP. $7 trillion in GDP was represented by Trump voters in 2020 in the election. That's the third largest economy in the world by GDP. Larger than India, larger than Japan, larger than Germany, and no major corporate entities in the United States today are talking to that cohort of Americans. When that cohort of Americans, with all of their purchasing power, can actually stand up and move their money away from the economic engine that is celebrated by people like the Clintons, we're actually going to see lasting change in a pretty transformative fashion. The other thing I'll mention is that you touched on the spiritual element of this. We love liberty because we know the author. I'm a person of faith. I hold my Christian values very near and dear to my heart. And everything we do as a company is meant to celebrate and push forward those values. We believe in a free market because we believe in competition. We believe that those with the right set of operating principles and upheld integrity are going to win in the long run as they provide service to consumers. These are basic truths that need to be embraced again. And when you're able to push back with those basic truths, it's more than just a political battle. It really is a deeper principled spiritual one. I actually heard Tucker Carlson speak at our church in San Diego, California about 3 years ago. And he came and he stood on stage and he said, never in a million years did I think I would be standing on stage at a church telling you what I'm about to tell you. What we are facing is not political, it is spiritual. He said, I've learned that this is more than just a battle of right or left or certain policy agendas versus another set of policy agendas. This is a battle of good and evil. When our political leaders are willing to label half the country as deplorables in need of reprogramming, you know that this battle is far deeper than what we've seen on the surface. And it's up to us that know the truth, because the truth does set you free. It's up to us that know the truth to push back, to speak it out loudly and proudly, to not be silenced, but instead recognize with all the resource at our back that we have the power to enforce change. They just feel like there's no threat at the moment. They don't feel like they have any need to change, but we, the people, can make them feel differently.
And that is a great message of hope. Michael Seiffert, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciated hearing your insights on so many important issues. We love what you're doing. Encourage everybody who's listening to check out Public Square. What you're doing is great work, and we certainly support all of that great work that you're doing. So keep it up, and God bless you. Michael, thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today's episode is sponsored by Emergency Assistance Plus. Now, your membership with EA Plus provides you with an extra layer of protection anytime you travel. Whether you're thousands of miles away or on a short road trip away from home, you'll have peace of mind should a medical emergency arise. EA Plus membership gives you access to a team of highly skilled professionals, and they will ensure that you receive proper medical care and get fast and reliable transportation home. Get that extra layer of protection anytime you travel. Become an EA Plus member today. Call EA Plus at 800-445-3575 or visit emergencyassistanceplus.com/BFA podcast.
The Association of Mature American Citizens is the conservative voice for Americans 50 and older. AMAC is fighting for the values that you hold dear. Join today. Together, we can write the course of America.